There is a moment in almost every survivor's account, a moment that they return to over and over in therapy and in interviews and in the middle of the night when sleep won't come, where they can identify, in retrospect, the exact point at which they knew something was deeply wrong. Not suspected. Not worried. No. The moment where the architecture of the thing they were living inside became briefly, horribly visible. For Mara, that moment came on a Tuesday evening in October, 14 months after she had moved to Rome, in the kitchen of the Oschen's apartment she shared with two women from the group. She had received a message from her mother, a long message, the kind her mother sent when she was frightened, full of questions that circled the real question without quite landing on it. Her mother had been trying to reach her for 10 days. She had replied to 2 of those attempts with short, warm, deflecting messages, so busy but so happy, will call soon, and had not called. She had not called because she had been told, gently but firmly, by Sophia and by the woman the group called the Bridge, a senior member whose role was explicitly to manage new recruits' relationships with their outside lives, that her mother's anxiety was a form of control, that the relationship was enmeshed in ways that were limiting Mara's growth, that the distance she was feeling from her family was not a problem to be solved, but a healthy development to be honored. She had believed this. She had, in fact, felt grateful for the framing because it transformed her guilt about not calling into a form of self-care. This is what sophisticated psychological manipulation looks like from the inside. It doesn't feel like manipulation. It feels like clarity. But on that Tuesday evening, alone in the kitchen while her housemates were at a group meeting she had skipped because of a migraine, she read her mother's message in full, really read it, without the filter of the group's language in her head, and something shifted. Her mother had written, "I looked at your Instagram and you haven't posted anything in 4 months, and the last photo you posted you look different. Your eyes look different. I'm not trying to control you. I'm your mother. Please just call me so I can hear your voice." Mara sat with that message for a long time. Then she did something she hadn't done in months. She looked at herself in the kitchen window reflection, really looked, and tried to see what her mother saw. And she felt not panic, not revelation, just a quiet, cold, very specific fear. The kind of fear that comes not from something outside you, but from a question you are suddenly terrified to answer honestly. The question was, if I wanted to leave tomorrow, could I? She didn't answer it that night. She put the phone face down on the counter, took an ibuprofen for her migraine, and went to bed. But the question had been asked. And once that question is asked, it does not go away. What happened over the following 3 months is difficult to reconstruct in precise sequence because the sources are multiple and sometimes contradictory. Mara's own account, given in a series of interviews 2 years after she left Italy, the accounts of 2 group members who left around the same time, and the investigative record compiled by the Polizia di Stato unit that eventually took the case. But the broad shape is clear. Mara began to test the walls. Quietly, carefully, in ways she hoped would not be noticed, because by this point she understood, at least instinctively, that being seen to test them would have consequences she wasn't ready for. She started keeping a second journal, hidden in a tampon box in her bathroom, because she had become aware that her primary journal was occasionally read by her housemates. She began rereading old messages from friends outside the group, friends she had told herself she had simply grown apart from, and hearing in them a consistency and a warmth that she had been trained to reframe as limitation. She called her mother. Not from her regular phone, which she had become aware was monitored through a group messaging app that had been installed on it early in her membership under the guise of a community coordination tool. She called from a payphone in Testaxio, the kind that barely exists anymore, that she had found on a long walk she had told her housemates was for errands. She stood in a glass booth on a Roman street in November rain and heard her mother's voice and cried so hard she could barely speak. Her mother said, "Tell me where you are." She said, "I don't know how to leave." Those 4 words are the center of this story. Not "I don't want to leave," not "I'm not sure I should leave," "I don't know how." Because that is what coercive control at its most complete actually produces. Not a person who wants to stay, but a person who has been so thoroughly separated from the practical, emotional, and material infrastructure of an independent life that leaving feels not like a choice but like a cliff edge. Mara had no apartment outside the group's network. Her primary income ran through the group cooperatives. Her closest relationships, the people she saw every day, the people she cooked with and celebrated with and who had become, genuinely, the people she loved most, were all inside the group. Leaving would mean leaving all of it simultaneously. Leaving her home, her work, her community, her daily life, the person she had become over the past year, the language she had learned to describe herself and her experience. It would mean stepping off a cliff in a foreign country where she barely spoke the language and starting from nothing. At 27 years old. Alone. With the knowledge communicated to her through countless small moments over 14 months that the people she was leaving would not simply let her go. That there would be consequences. That former members who left badly, who left without permission, who left and then talked, experienced difficulties that were never explicitly described but were always somehow known. This is the point where most accounts of cult involvement in documentaries and podcast episodes and true crime articles introduce the dramatic turn, the escape, the rescue, the intervention. And those things did eventually happen in Mara's case. But what is lost in the drama of the escape is the 18 months between that phone call from Testaxio and the night she finally left, 18 months that were, in their own way, the most psychologically complex and damaging period of the entire experience. Because Mara didn't leave immediately after calling her mother. She couldn't. And the fact that she couldn't, that she remained, for a year and a half, inside a situation she now knew was wrong. Smiling at group dinners and attending group events and living in the group's apartment and running her freelance work through the group's cooperative, all while secretly rebuilding, piece by piece, the infrastructure she would need to survive without them. That period is the one she speaks about with the most pain. Not because it was the most dangerous, but because it required her to perform a version of herself she had stopped believing in every single day for 18 months. And because she is still not entirely sure, even now, where the performance ended and where she began. What she was doing during those 18 months, with a patience and a strategic clarity that genuinely astonished the investigators who later heard about it, was building a parallel life. She quietly resumed contact with outside friends, always from public phones or borrowed devices, always with a cover story for her housemates. She began systematically documenting the group's activities, not in writing, which could be found, but in her memory, rehearsing specific dates and names and incidents with the discipline of someone preparing testimony. She reconnected with a former colleague in London, who connected her with an organization that specializes in helping people leave high-control groups, an organization that operates, for obvious reasons, with significant discretion, and that provided her with a specific protocol for exiting in a way that minimized both the risk of retaliation and the risk of psychological collapse. She opened a bank account in a different bank than the one the group used, depositing small amounts over many months. She found a room in an apartment in Monteverde through a contact entirely outside the group's network and paid 3 months' deposit in cash on a rainy Wednesday afternoon without telling a single person in the group. She was, in the language the exit organization used, building the runway. She was making sure that when she stepped off the cliff, there was something underneath her. She left on a Thursday. Not a dramatic Thursday. A completely ordinary one. She waited until her housemates were at a weekly group meeting, a meeting that ran for at least 3 hours, and packed 2 bags with the things she had quietly identified as essential in the weeks before. Documents, devices, the hidden journal, the things that were hers and not the group's. She called a taxi. She did not leave a note. She had been advised not to leave a note because notes invite responses, and the response in a situation like this would not have been a gentle goodbye. She arrived at the Monteverde apartment at 7:43 p.m. According to the timestamp on the photo she took of herself sitting on the floor of the empty room, back against the wall, knees pulled up, face doing something that was not quite crying and not quite smiling. She sent the photo to her mother. The caption was 3 words, "I got out." What came after was not simple. It is never simple, and any account that makes it simple is not telling the full story. There were weeks of profound disorientation, the specific psychological destabilization that exit counselors call floating, where the mental framework you have been living inside collapses and there is, temporarily, nothing to replace it. There were moments of grief for the friendships, the community, the warmth that had been real even if the structure around it was not. There were attempts at contact from former group members, some hostile, some heartbreakingly gentle, that she had been prepared for, but that still cost her. There was the slow, effortful process of rebuilding a self that had been systematically dismantled over 2 years, in a country that was not her own, in a language she was still learning, without the support network that the group had trained her to believe was the only real support she would ever have. It took time. It is still taking time. Recovery from coercive control is not a finish line. It is a practice, and Mara is still practicing. But here is why her story matters beyond itself. Here is why it is worth telling at this length and in this detail. The group that recruited Mara was not unique. It was not a bizarre outlier. It was one of, according to a 2023 report by a coalition of European researchers studying what they term new coercive organizations, more than 300 identified structured high-control groups currently operating in major European cities, with particular concentration in Rome, Barcelona, Berlin, and Amsterdam. Cities, not coincidentally, that are magnets for exactly the population these groups prey upon. Young, educated, internationally mobile people who have left behind their home communities in search of something more meaningful, and who arrive in a foreign city with high hopes and thin social roots. The researchers estimate that between 15,000 and 40,000 people across Europe are currently in various stages of involvement with groups matching this profile. Most of them do not know it. Most of them right now are sitting at a group dinner somewhere, laughing at a joke, feeling the warm certainty of belonging and thinking, "I finally found my people." Some of them will eventually feel, alone in a kitchen on a Tuesday evening, a question form itself that they are terrified to answer. Some of them will find, as Mara did, the courage to ask it honestly. And some of them will not. Some of them will stay for years or forever in a structure designed to consume them, held not by locks and chains but by the most sophisticated imprisonment ever devised. The slow, patient, exquisitely calibrated replacement of your own judgment with someone else's, until the voice in your head that says something is wrong is no longer recognizable as yours. Mara is 31 now. She lives in Rome still, a decision that surprised people who knew her story, but that she has explained simply. She refused to let them take the city from her too. She has a small design studio. She has friends, real ones, the kind she built slowly and with her eyes open. She still speaks carefully, as people do who have learned that words can be used as architecture. She agreed to have her story told because, as she said in the last of her interviews, "If I had seen this video before I went to that language exchange, I don't know if it would have stopped me. But I would have known the shape of the thing. I would have had a word for it. And having a word for something, that matters. That is sometimes the difference." She still has the vision board. She found it in a box of things her mother had kept in storage: the studio apartment in Cincinnati, the cobblestone streets, the sun-drenched terraces, the pasta. She keeps it rolled up in a closet in her Rome apartment. She has not put it on the wall. But she has not thrown it away either. That seems right somehow. That seems like exactly the kind of complicated, honest, ongoing relationship with your own past that you have when you have survived something real and come out the other side still yourself, damaged, changed, more cautious and stubbornly, defiantly still there.